Ladies and gentlemen, today the Nile TV International, our today's edition of the Breakfast Show, and we're talking about the celebration or marking the education, the World Education Day, which is actually marking the crucial role of education in building civilizations, in building the sustainable development, and for the whole countries worldwide. Well, to shed more light about the relations between the education and science and the life of the ancient Egyptians, we are delighted to be today joined here in this studio by our prominent guest, Mr. Ihab Kamel, historian and researcher. Mr. Ihab, very good morning to you.
Good
Thanks
morning
for
to you.
joining us today. Thanks for your time. Well, talking about the World Education Day and how we all know, and the whole world actually, they do really know that the ancient Egyptians, they really did learn the whole world, civilizations, science, engineering, everything. So, talking about science and education in the ancient Egyptian life.
Well, education in ancient Egypt was something very important because for them education, it was necessary for the management of the country itself. They looked at the country as a big project that needed to be managed, and it needed people with competence. That's why they have given a great deal of interest to this education, and the education was mainly elementary. That's what they had focused on at the beginning. The children were taken to what was called Per'an, or the house of life, the temples, where they were given a primary education, which was concentrating on writing, memorizing hieroglyphics, hieroglyphic characters because it was complicated, and the basis of arithmetic. And then they used to be promoted after this stage into another stage of education, which was middle education. Also, it was very important that in this education they would teach them the religion and the basis
of middle education?
No, basically from the beginning. Education was religious education was necessary because they believed that this would give them moral values that will add to them in the future, and they did not ignore it because they found that this was part of building the character, as a matter of fact. Later on, in the middle education, they continue on the same system, but they start to concentrate on teaching him a craft. Also, there was another kind of education which was for the elite or for the nobles and the royalty, and they were educated in royal schools. But it was a kind of a selected community more than a different content. It was the same content, the same, it was the same kind of education. Also, handcrafts. They had schools for handcrafts. Then they would join, the people who were educated, they would join a handcrafts workshop either in the palace or joining a nobleman or whatever to learn a handcraft together with the education. Then some others would continue in the house of life if they want to be doctors, if they want, and usually those who had chosen medicine in particular, they had to be selected because the ancient Egyptians believed that the physician had to be on a very high moral level in regards to practice, in regards to being able to enter every house, and all the people would go and they would actually be exposed to him. So they believed that this person had to be on a very high moral level. That's why you would find that lots of them were actually priests who had been well educated religiously. And the Egyptians believed that education was the best way to escalate the social ladder, to be somebody, to be an official in the government or a high official someday. If the person was well educated, that would make him one day a director or an overseer, or maybe a chancellor one day.
Wow.
Yes, and that is why they had given a great deal of care to the elementary education that concentrated on copying and memorizing in order to make a strong base for them to be able to absorb all the different branches of knowledge that he was supposed to study, because without language, without having a good command of the language in reading and writing, he cannot be educated. They realized this at a very early age. So they had a great deal of care about teaching reading and writing the language, because the language is the key to all other branches of education. And then they had started teaching them also with practical education. If you look, for example, at the ancient Egyptian builders, you cannot imagine that someone who had built the Great Pyramid does not know about the Pythagorean theorem, for example, but the Egyptians had studied it in a reversed way. They would teach the child that if you, for example, want to make a triangle, bring 3 pieces of rope, their proportions are 3 to 4 to 5, then you would get a right angle triangle. Their education was very practical, while the Greeks, their education was very theoretical. So we can say that ancient Egyptian education was practicing practical math versus the Greek education, which is theoretical.
Wait a second, please. Talking about astrology, engineering, talking about math, algebra, in the life of the ancient Egyptians, they did really set the basis for the whole world, starting from building the pyramids, supposed to be a wonder till now. It's amazing, it's unique. Till nowadays, talking about medicine and how they also set the basis for the new researches and studies, they do indicate that the ancient Egyptians reached a very high level of getting to medications and drugs. So,
the ancient Egyptians, by nature, they needed to organize everything, because they had realized after long centuries of observation that without organization they have no future. They had realized, and what had helped them was the environment as well. When they observed the environment around them, they had found that there are repetitive cycles that never changes. Flood, dry season, flood, dry season, sunrise, sunset, cultivation, flood.
It's amazing how
harvest.
they did get to reach this by instinct. I mean, the phenomena of the alignment of the sun on the face of the Ramses II till now, which is really amazing for the whole world. How they did really approach this or
by
reach
observation and by the discovery of agriculture at a very early age. Usually the human being has needs. Everybody has needs.
Of course.
The basic needs, if they are fulfilled and satisfied, then it's quite easy that you would sit down and relax. Once you sit down and relax, you start contemplating. While you contemplate, you start to observe. While you observe, you start making relations. Then the discovery of writing. All this knowledge can be documented. The Egyptians, they adored documentation. Everything was documented. Although papyrus was expensive, but this didn't make...
It was expensive at that time as well?
At that time, yes. It wasn't... That's why they wrote on everything. The children, when they were educated, they used to write on wooden boards or pieces of ostraka, pottery, baked pottery.
On stones.
Yes, on baked pottery. So for them, documentation was very important. And they used to read very carefully what the earliers had documented and correct or rectify any mistakes they had found. Because they were builders by nature, then it was necessary for them to study mathematics, but not in a theoretical way. They learned mathematics practically.
Right.
It's what we know nowadays as practical mathematics, not theoretical mathematics.
Or the applied.
Exactly. Studying the material, studying the geographical nature of the countries around them and the area to be able to exploit all the mineral resources needed for their construction. For example, the ancient Egyptians used to experiment in construction. How is that? Look at King Zoser's complex in Saqqara. In Saqqara, actually, before that time, the Egyptians used to use mud brick. Excuse me. Mud brick and papyrus reeds in construction. Then they decided, or Imhotep decided, to build the first stone building in history. The problem was he did not understand the properties of stone. And he did not know what it was capable of and what it was incapable of. It is something very important.
Of course.
So,
indeed,
when you look at the architectural style of the complex of King Zoser, for example, you will find that all the decorative styles and the architecture that was practiced by mud brick was applied on limestone. And from there, the learning curve had started to rise in construction and building. They said, okay, if it can do this, if I can get this, then I can take a little risk and make the column, instead of having engaged columns with walls linking between them, I think the columns could stand on their own, and so on. That's why when we were studying archaeology, especially, they used to teach us that the first column was the Dorian column, the Greek column. Hey, how come? The Dorian column is 7th century BC. How about the ancient Egyptian columns? They say, oh, that's pre-Dorian. They don't say Egyptian. So, all this knowledge was documented.
Yeah.
So, this had reflected on education. Accordingly, they had reached such a huge, high standard in art and architecture. The art itself, the artisan, he had to study lots of other branches of knowledge, especially anatomy.
Yep.
If you study anatomy, it's easy for you to study medicine or to become an artist. Look at all the details in the ancient Egyptian statues. You'll find that the artist had not only studied anatomy plus the handcraft itself, but he studied math. Because to find every part is in proportion with the whole mass, you need to know something called the golden proportion. That the unit to the whole must be equal to 1 over 1.618.
Wow.
When they painted a wall, they had to divide the wall into a certain number of squares. The human figure should not exceed 21 squares. And usually it's 19, occupying 19 squares. Later on in the Ptolemaic period, they used 21 squares. That's why you will find that the figures in the Ptolemaic period are a little bit curvy or chubby.
Oh.
This is math. This is math. When they, and we're not going to go far. Look at the papyrus that was discovered in Wadi al-Garf. That was discovered a few years ago. It's speaking about advanced mathematics. They're in papyrus, showing different triangles with different proportions. Isn't that what we call trigonometry nowadays? Because trigonometry, that's what a builder will use. To know the proportions during construction.
Yes.
So Basically speaking, the ancient Egyptians not only practiced theoretical education, but also practical education. All the hand craftsmen, they were educated in studios. And we discovered a studio in Tel El Amarna of an artisan where we discovered the incomplete head of Nefertiti.
That was my next question, Mr. Ihab. Actually, nowadays we have school, we have institutions, we have faculties, etc. Where and how they did started to learn the new generations out of the documentations or the papyrus, or where and how?
There are many documents that have been discovered on papyri, and this shows that the ancient Egyptians, in every temple, because the temple was also an educational foundation, they had their own documents which they used to teach the students from.
Wow.
Every temple has like a library. And the thing is that they didn't only let the students pass with like a test on a piece of paper or by writing something. No, he had to try and experiment what he was studying so that they would recognize him as an artisan or as a doctor or as an architect.
They started to show to highlight the importance or significance of experiments that we maybe recently we discovered this. The importance of experiments and applying arts and etc.
Yes, because for them it's a matter of survival.
Yes.
Without mathematics, they will not be able to calculate the amount of grain stored and the amount of grain needed to be stored in the dry years where there's no flood. They needed to know how many acres they're going to cultivate, the harvest, the amount of the harvest. That's why you will find that the job of the scribe, that was the beginning of being an official. And on the walls of the tombs of the nobles, when you see the noble is checking his farms and his cattle and all of that, next to him you will find always a scribe with the pencils behind his ear, documenting everything in numbers. The Egyptians, for example, they discovered numbers, and it was very similar to the Roman system.
Yeah.
Because they found that everything has to be documented, and that's what made them a great civilization.
Of course, that what made them unique and great till nowadays, and amazing for the whole world, and actually still a mysterious world of the ancient Egyptians. And talking about them, about their life, about education and science and the ancient Egyptian life is actually endless. And of course with you, Mr. Ihab, your analysis, your insights is really actually very interesting. But coming back from the ancient life to the nowadays life, and today we are actually anticipating the hot match between the Egyptian national team and the Senegal team in the African Nations Cup, African Cups of Nations. So what's exactly your anticipations for the match and the where you're going to watch it?
I have no anticipations, I have hopes.
We all have hopes and dreams. Yeah.
I'm hoping that we would pass that match, but my advice, don't play their game. Let them play your game. Don't play harder. Play smarter. That's all what I can say.
Yep, this is the issue, and we've got to do our best not to get into the penalties, to try to defend and to try to play it smarter, as you mentioned, exactly, and not to reach the penalties time, especially with Senegal, out of our experience with them. Well, Mr. Ihab Kamel, the historian and researcher, many thanks for your insights, for your time, and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Have a nice day, and of course, inshallah, we all cross fingers players, and we all pray for our national team today, inshallah, to beat the Senegal and to reach the final for the AFCON. And by this, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of our today's edition of the Breakfast Show. Many thanks for watching, and from myself, Hanan Al-Khouri.